to Cognitive Vigilance Podcast. Sorry we're late. Jacob was having some computer issues. I am here with Kyle, Rin, and Jacob Winograd. Jake, would you give a little Biblical Anarchy on Twitter? Will you give a little spiel, who you are, what you do?
Yeah, so
Your
I'm Jacob
vibe?
Winograd. I'm a host for the Biblical Anarchy podcast, which is a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute, part of our Christians for Liberty network, which has a whole slew of different podcasts. And I basically make the case for libertarianism, free society, Austrian economics, anti-war, all that good stuff from the Christian perspective, and have different episodes on various subjects relating to theology, politics, and all that. And I've been a lurker and activist in different roles within the libertarian movement and Libertarian Party for the last 4 years or so. So that's good enough introduction, I think.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that I do see a lot of Orthodox. Are you Protestant? Would you?
Yeah, by default. I mean, although I don't I'm a self-hating Protestant because I hate Protestantism, but I just can't talk myself into Catholicism or Orthodoxy.
Well,
and so you're kind of just Protestant by default.
I was telling Ryan earlier, I was like, the Protestants think the Catholics are heretics. The Catholics think the Protestants are heretics. I think they're all heretics. But
yeah, I grew up Catholic, but I got no, we can trash the Catholics just as much as anything else. I don't have a problem with that.
But what's interesting is that I do think that the more Orthodox, whether Eastern or Western Orthodox, they all call, I don't know, they're confusing because they all call themselves
Well, you have
Catholic.
Eastern Orthodox, then you have Oriental Orthodox, you have Roman Catholic, you have the Roman Catholic, and then you have Byzantine, Eastern Catholicism.
They're so exhausting.
Yeah.
They're exhausting. Their bureaucracy is exhausting. It's fucking exhausting. But they're also they think that libertarianism, usually from what I've seen, they think libertarianism is antithetical to Christianity, yes, which I can make lots of arguments for why they're wrong there. But today we are talking about all sorts of fun stuff. I know we kind of briefly talked about, I know that you don't, we've gotten into a debate about porn because you are obviously very much against porn in general, right? I'm pretty nuanced. My boyfriend he made a tweet that said that he thought porn was net positive for society and everyone lost their shit. And let's start there, I think. In regards to, obviously, from a Christian perspective, it makes sense why people would be against porn. Can you kind of give me your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, as you alluded to, I mean, I think from a Christian perspective, it's hard to make an argument for porn being virtuous. I mean, if virtuous, Jesus took, no. or even, I do tend to agree with that kind of motto that everything has its proper time and place, but I don't know what, where porn would fit into that. When we were having our back and forth, I was like, I could make much more nuanced cases for hard drugs than I could for porn, just because I just could. But I think, if Jesus took lust very seriously, he said that if your eye causes you to lust after another woman, to cut it out, which is an interesting point, by the way, because to sort of irritate the trad cons and stuff who like to put the onus on women to prevent men from lusting. That's not what Jesus said. Jesus said you're in control of your own lust, and he's like, if you cannot control your own lust, if your eye causes you to lust, cut it out, because better to enter the kingdom of heaven blind than to enter the gates of hell being able to see. But I could go beyond just a Christian. I can take my Christian hat off and just, I think in a just general sense, I find it hard to make even secular arguments for why porn is good in a society as a whole. I know there are some, arguments that porn might reduce violence, particularly sexual violence, although I think that those studies are a little bit, I mean, the problem with all these studies is always user bias, the type you first of all, who's going to be willing to participate in these studies.
Well, it's not just that.
Mostly done. Well, go ahead.
Well, sorry. I was gonna say it's not just that; it's that the more that porn has been readily available, and I'm not talking about just porn. I don't think that porn should be like all over the place. Like you should just like open up your browser and it's like porn is just there, right?
You know,
But the
like
more
Twitter.
that, yeah, exactly.
Well, you know what?
The more
I'll give Twitter credit. They're actually pretty good, at least in my experience, of keeping porn off of like your main screen. Like you really have to go search it out to find it. Now
you
granted,
kidding?
like the bots in your
porn.
replies, yeah, the bots in your replies are one thing, but like to have straight up porn on the TL, I'll be honest, I can't say I've really
Yeah.
seen it outside of like the outrage engagement brokers that post, you know, rage bait of dudes getting nailed in the Senate, and I'm sure you know what
I'm one of
talking
those
about.
people that pay for Twitter, and so I don't really see
I
many
pay for
ads.
Twitter too.
But before I paid for Twitter, and there was a lot of ads. A lot of them were, you know, in that vein of you know, maybe they weren't like hard porn, but they were like soft porn kind of.
Okay, so
Really?
you just mean I can't say I've ever seen that, but
I saw a lot of
I
it.
do
Yeah.
see OnlyFans ads, which is just the website
Okay.
promoting
So-
like not it's not a creator. It's just like it's literally OnlyFans promoting their website. But
OnlyFans wasn't supposed to be
still
just
enough.
porn. Yeah, OnlyFans or OnlyFans wasn't supposed to just be porn.
I know people who have OnlyFans.
Free
that are
market
just-
decided.
Yeah,
The free market decided.
I know OnlyFans people who just cook, and they're not like there's nothing sexy
yeah,
about it,
that's true.
but they don't make any money.
Yeah, of course. But
Yeah,
my
well, we all know
argument-
where the top earners are. Sorry.
in
I-
regard to like the violence part, my argument is that actually there is, since porn has been readily available, violence has actually gone down, rapes go down. And I actually do think that there is an argument here in regards to the fact that like there's never been a time in society where every man gets to get married and pair bond. Like it's like an unfortunate truth. And so there does have to be something there for that. And this is why
There
prostitution
is. It's
has
called
been,
abstinence.
yes, I know. We should all be like aesthetic. They should all just be
Or
monastic
actually,
Christians. Yes,
It-
that's
it's
an
actually not
option
even just abstinence. It's if really it should be
for the rest of
if
their
none of the
lives.
women, if you can't find a woman who wants to be with you, then there's something wrong with you. You should
Oh,
actually work
well,
to
no.
self-improve yourself and find a way to
Okay.
You know,
Well,
Fine,
maybe
That's
a
a very
little
red
bit.
pill, that's a very red pill message.
No. I really
Can
don't think it
I-
is. Like, real quick, I just want to throw this out there. So, like, you're not going to eliminate guys' natural drive to want to have sex, and like, I am not saying at all that porn is a good thing for guys to sedate themselves with instead of improving. But like at the same time, we have to recognize that like guys are going to have a high sex drive no matter what. And should they discipline that? Yes. But we also need to, I shouldn't say need, but like porn for some guys is going to be a reasonable outlet that's going to, you know, be of relatively little harm to anybody else where they can kind of let it go. And I mean, beyond that, there's a
Well, you mean you
majority of
can-
Christian men that admit they're addicted to porn.
well, yeah. I mean, and I'll speak just frankly. I was someone who was in that camp, and I'm about a year removed from completely quitting porn. And after struggling with it from the time I was a child, I was exposed to, you know, internet porn at the time I was 13. So and it's anyway. Listen, I'm a libertarian, so I mean, I just want to
Yes.
always want to preface this with like I'm not advocating for any law.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
mainly because I'm black pilled on the state.
And you're
to
an
be able to solve
anarchist,
this.
which
Yeah,
is
I'm
like
an
the
anarchist.
most,
So
the most extreme
right.
version of
right.
libertarian.
So, but because I'm a libertarian, because I'm an anarchist, I think that we have to, as libertarians, what we need to point people towards when we're arguing for our ideas is the idea of self-governance and
Mhm.
people taking responsibility. So I think that I tend to push really hard against sort of the live and let live mentalities, not because I want to push an authoritarian response to cultural problems. Rather, I'm like saying, listen, if we want people to take our ideas seriously, then we have to be serious about advocating for cultural norms and societal norms that are conducive towards self-governance, that are conducive
Agreed.
towards having low time preferences and things like that. So, well, I mean, listen, porn, just like prostitution, has always existed. Porn exists and probably will always exist. So, I mean, that's just a fact of life. What I'm saying is that porn should be viewed as a harmful vice. We should be a lot more serious about talking about the negative effects of porn being exposed to children. Like, listen, like it's one thing. Like, listen, I view cigarettes as harmful, right? I can make a distinction between someone who like casually once in a while smokes a cigar or smokes a cigarette or something, and I can make a distinction between someone who might like recreationally once in a while they might use porn. Like I would still, just from my Christian perspective, not approve of that. But I can make a distinction between that and then like your habitual porn user and someone who like watches porn, maybe like they're first exposed to it as an adult versus kind of the norm now, which is, we have kids as young as like 12 or 13 being exposed to porn and then exposed to more and more graphic, more and more violent, more and more extreme forms of porn. And AI is only making this worse in terms of just like creating simulated reality and causing people to become heavily addicted, heavily, pulled out and dissociated from reality. And then, listen, the male sex drive isn't going away. So I agree with what Kyle's saying. I just think that we need to have a cultural like taboo of sorts on porn, offer help for people that do get hooked on it, and then encourage people to like listen. That drive, that biological imperative, that is a good thing that you should use to
for more productive causes.
channel that into productive causes and outlets and stuff, mainly towards self-improvement. Because I mean, if all the women are rejecting you, I got news for you. It's not all the women who have the problem.
Can I make okay, so I managed a strip club, right? This was one of my jobs. There are men that were like paraplegics, like men that like literally like there was no way they were going to be able to have like relationships with women. Like they were in wheelchairs. They would come in and this was like their time to like have feminine attention. And yes, they had to pay for it. A lot of men, like this is at least somewhat, in my opinion, part of it. There were men, and then and from a Christian perspective, I know that you would be like, this doesn't matter, but like just from a secular argument on like there are certain benefits for people that can't get. I know you're like just improve yourself, but there are definitely people that don't have that option depending on their situation. It's people that have like certain disabilities that make it very hard for them to connect with people, whether or not they have like Down syndrome or whatever. Like, I don't know. There's like a lot of layers to like what someone's issue is on, or if they're like severely autistic, right? That's another thing. I've lots of guys were like that would come into the strip club that were like, we're not talking like lightly autistic. We're talking to the point where it's like very hard for them to communicate with people. And they still had those drives, So so my argument would be like, it is something for people that can't. And I do think that there is an argument to be made that like this is one reason why prostitution did always exist. Even the church condoned it for a long. The church allowed it for a long time in the Middle Ages, medieval ages, and the reason is because it has always been true that there is a percentage of men that aren't going to get a wife or pair bond, and they need to kind of create something there for those people. And I think that even like I understand the Christian argument in regards to like lust, but like epithuma, which is the word that means lust, it means like strongly desire, right? But like and like then I also would make the argument that I've watched porn and I've never been like watching porn and been like coveting the person or like being like, I need her. I need her right
You've
here.
probably never been in a moment where you felt like you couldn't get sex if you wanted it, though.
Yes. No, and then there's that. That's the other part. It's like, okay, well then, yes, there will be people that can't get sex, and not just from like they suck, like you improve yourself, but like people that just like have life situations where they can't. Like, would you just say be abstinent? Like, you don't need feminine attention. Like, you just don't get it. Like,
I mean,
I don't.
the Apostle Paul said it would almost be better not to marry and
Of
to instead
course,
devote your life to
of
ministry.
course.
And I think that there are a
That's what
lot
he
of
said.
people. There are a lot of people for whom. And listen, I think this also applies not just to like straight people who never find a partner. I think it applies to even people that either find themselves attracted to the same sex or attracted to no one at all. Like I think there's people who, God might have something for you that's not, finding a partner to live with and having
You
an
want to bring
outlet
back
for
the
those
monasteries?
sexual energy. I don't have a problem with people devoting their life to God and to ministry. I think
No,
that's
I
something
know. That was the
that's
first
noble
wave of
and more.
feminism. That's my argument. Monasteries were the first wave. Because it was Christians were, a lot of women were they didn't want to, if they didn't want to get married or get remarried, or they didn't want to be forced into an
Right.
arranged marriage, they would join a monastery.
And to
this
be
was before it became forced. This was before forced monasteries.
to address your other point quickly, just from taking the Christian perspective out of it, just from a secular
Yeah.
perspective about like paraplegics and people who can't listen.
Yeah.
I would make a distinction between that, adults being exposed to things like that when they're older and they don't have other options. But that would still be like a taboo. Like it's not something that like you go to your local mall and there's like a little store where like kids are passing by where it's like, hey, this is the like, what I mean? Like I still think there needs to be a taboo where that stuff is heavily culturally regulated, right? So like socially regulated to like you have to really work to seek that out, and that's not something that you broadcast publicly the way that porn is broadcast publicly.
I think it
Yeah, I
should
don't hate
be
that either.
invisible. I think it should be invisible. I've said that. I think sex work should be legal, but I think it should be invisible. I don't think that it should be the reason why OnlyFans is the way it is right now is because it doesn't have a search algorithm. And it's because they don't have a way for people to go on OnlyFans and search. So OnlyFans creators, in order to be found, have to go on social media and promote themselves in order to be found, which is OnlyFans' fucking fault. Create a search algorithm, but they're promoting but I get why they do it, because they want to promote their website. They don't want a search algorithm. They're trying to like get more people.
They want organic attraction to their website.
Exactly. Yeah. But in my opinion, that's a shitty business model.
I mean, I think the argument against like exposure to kids is a valid one, but that's a much deeper rooted thing in our society at large, right? Exposure
I don't even
in
think
general.
Sex workers would or even
I mean, like
people that create porn would want it to be exposed to children.
Correct, and I honestly would suspect that like some of the aspects of social media are probably more immediately damaging than like finding porn. I mean, I don't know. There's studies and things of that nature that would go into that, but I do think exposure to the wider internet and the vices of the world at large is a problem that kids are facing today because it's so accessible. But I don't know. I don't lay the blame at porn's feet for that, right? That's a whole thing across the board. I would be curious though at how you feel about like where you would rank porn as a vice in terms, because I know you had said like that, there was even a use case for like drug use or things of that nature. Like to me, porn is...
I would rather kids be exposed to marijuana than porn.
Interesting.
That's not
to
heroin. Yes to alcohol. Heroin's probably no. I mean, yeah, I would probably say heroin and fentanyl. I mean, listen, a libertarian, we're all for like the hookers and blow, right? But I mean, yeah, I think, no, like, yeah, that's probably where the line would be. I mean, I think personally,
wait, so you think porn is right below heroin?
Yeah,
like heroin's worse, but porn is right there.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the ideal would be that kids should not really use any substance until they're at least 18, or ideally closer to 25, because their brains are still developing. But in terms of like rank ordering the negative side effects and stuff, it's like I know a lot of people okay, who used marijuana and even used like mushrooms and things like that when they were teenagers and young adults, and although some of them ended up being deadbeats or going down into harder drugs, the vast majority of them like kind of grew out of that phase, and you don't see any like long-term, long-lasting addictions or impairments or anything that stemmed from that, the way that porn is afflicting a lot of young men in terms of, I mean, even like the more like benign like side effects are just like, men suffering from erectile dysfunction and men having poor sexual relationships. And then on the on the extreme end, you have porn that's influencing, especially when it's exposed to young children, like there is a correlation in some studies of now granted there's user bias in this because it's like when you're interviewing a pool of criminals, but in terms of if you were there's this one study that showed of like people who have committed violent crimes, specifically like violent sexual crimes, the there was a larger percentage of them that had been exposed to porn at a young age than those who had like been
Will you
exposed to
send
porn.
me that? Because I've seen like I'm not saying that it's not true, but like is it more so because of the fact that like everyone's been exposed to
Well,
porn
yeah,
at this
correlative,
point?
causative kind of thing. I
Again,
would
this
be
is
very
all
curious.
well. Listen, anytime we're going to dive into any science on this, it's all going to be correlative.
Well,
So
yeah,
we
there's
can't.
also
Yeah.
multiple
So
studies that
and
says
I
the
would.
majority of porn users are married. There's multiple that have said that, and OnlyFans has like lots of stuff that says like the majority of their subscribers.
Well,
are
okay. Well, you know what? Maybe this might pivot over to a more useful conversation that I've been kind of pondering a lot. If we have this issue where 30% of guys on Tinder are married, and the majority of Christians who are married are addicted to porn, then maybe we need to ask of like what is society's larger purpose for marriage at this point? Now, I'm not saying we should throw away the institution or change anything, but like we need to have a serious conversation about what the function of marriage is if we're seeing these kind of issues come up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, marriage is a very confused institution right now in our culture,
Yes.
especially because it's been sort of separated away from maybe its original intent. Like I think the only reason that you could ever say why marriage became a state institution and not just a religious one was like you could make an argument for like you should have a vested interest in the raising of like the next generation, I guess, and so like the state officially recognizing the parents of like, hey, you two are married, and the expectation was like you're going to have kids and whatnot. And then like and granted, I wish we just didn't have the IRS and the tax system, but then the tax system was sort of like, hey, if you're married and have kids, then you get more tax incentives and refunds and deductions and stuff than those who don't. And okay, fine. But now it's like marriage has moved away from that towards just like, oh, it's just what people do when they want to, I don't know, say they're really committed to each other, but then they can just end it at any. So it's almost like, I don't know, it seems more or less meaningless in the civil sphere.
but it
Personally,
started as a state, but it always was a state thing. Christianity actually kind of changed the game a little bit, where because like historically it was in like the like pagan patriarchal societies as well. It was a state thing, but like I feel like Christianity kind of changed the game where it said to the husband as well, you must love your wife and your wife must love you, and like that was very unique but previously it
yeah.
didn't really matter if you loved your wife. The wife just needed to submit to the husband. It didn't really matter if he cared about you. I think Christianity kind of changed that. But then like there was I think it started that like via the state. I think Christianity kind of like tried, even though old habits die hard. I don't think that like the Greco-Roman cultural influence really changed a lot for a long time, but I do think that like why things are so confusing for in my opinion is because there is this like state thing and then this like spiritual thing that Christianity kind of did. Like I think a church father was the first person that said that marriage was a sacrament, right? That was like a church father that said that, right? That wasn't a thing before. So I think that the issue is that you have like this like state economic purpose, and then you have like the religious aspect and spiritual aspect, but like they should be two separate things, right? Like why are we combining them
Well,
and
I
having them
don't
be
know
one thing?
why. I don't know why the state. I mean, listen, the state shouldn't exist, but
Yeah, of course. Well,
but while the state exists, I'm not sure what business it really has in joining two people in any kind of. I
mhm.
mean, like, I guess if you want to like draw up some kind of contracts around property or like things like that, like you can do that through courts and lawyers and things like that, which I guess you'll need third party arbitration or government arbitration when those things need
Mhm.
enforced. But beyond that, I'm like, I don't know why the government has any involvement in any of this. And I know the libertarians use that as like the argument for, legalizing gay marriage and stuff, but I think that's just further mixed government into like our human society and human relationships and stuff. Whereas a better move would have been just like, let's just abolish the state side of marriage and just let marriage be a religious institution and just let people
or a
draw up
cultural
civil,
if you're not religious, right?
or fine, whatever. Like you
Yeah.
people can do whatever. Like you can go to Unitarian church or go to a, just or even just say, hey, we're married because we said we were. I mean, listen, I've done marriages for people. I'm not ordained. Like they just said, hey, can you do the ceremony for us? And we're going to say we're married, but they didn't go to the state and ask for a marriage license. They're just like, hey, we're married because we say so. Like,
yeah.
So,
exactly.
so I
do you have a problem with that at all? Is that like something that you're opposed to, or
what do you mean?
Like two people just being like out in a field with a friend saying, you guys are married now. Here's your, thing. Like,
I would distinguish it. Like, I mean, they can say it. I don't have a problem with it. If they tried to say like, we just decided we're married and they were to try to equate that to the same thing as like me having my pastor marry my wife and I'd be like, I don't know, it's kind of different for me, but like, I mean, I wouldn't get upset. I would just not view it as the same thing.
As legitimate.
But I wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just be like, well, you're doing your own thing. It's not the same as what I'm doing. I don't really care what you. So.
I hate to do this because this, as an anarchist, making the pro-state argument kind of makes me cringe. So not that I necessarily believe this, but like, what would you say about the state giving tax incentives to married couples as a way to kind of increase birth rates?
Well, Rome did this.
But do you see what I'm saying? Like, I think this is kind of like,
and it didn't work.
I think this is kind of the argument, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it is the argument. You hear people like Michael Knowles,
and I'm not for this.
Say this.
I'm just saying this is probably what
I'm not. Listen, I always die on the hill of saying the state shouldn't do something. Like,
agree,
but period.
But
like, listen,
but
like
engage with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we just shouldn't have state solutions to state created problems. Are just the road to perpetual tyranny. Like that's just the truth, and that's why I reject it. It's the same reason why I never bought into, although it's popular in like the Mises Caucus circles that like a lot of us run in. There's a lot of Mises Caucus libertarians who are more of the closed border type, and I've always been. I mean, I was like, listen, I'm not really an open border type. The government just shouldn't have any say over the border, period. And listen, it's like, listen. Yeah, there is a problem, of immigration right now along the border, and it's a state-created problem. And why would we go to the state to ask them to protect us and solve the problem they created? It's like, please find me a time in history where the state creates a problem, and then people petition to the state to save them, save us from the problem you created, and then the state comes up with the solution, and that ends up being good for society and good for long-term liberty and freedom. It's like I just don't play that game.
Do you have a quick level of like what level of state you'd like to exist?
Yeah, it's very quick. It's 0.
He's an anarchist.
No, I am. But I mean, like full anarchy is an impractical. Like, so what is your like?
Rin's not a libertarian, so he's
yeah.
gonna
I'm a token non-libertarian, but I love the idea because I have anarchist lean, but to me, anarchy is a corrective tool, not a permanent ideology, right? Like you use anarchy to move things in a correct direction and then balance again.
Anarchy is just the natural state of human beings. Anarchy is
sure.
A relationship. What we're doing right now is anarchy. It just means that people are voluntarily coexisting, interacting, trading, and things like that. When people apply coercion, there's an interruption of the anarchy and voluntarism. And I'm not against governance in terms of, I'm not against when rights are being violated, whether they're property rights or people's bodily autonomy is being harmed, which you can describe as an extension of property rights. Listen, I believe in the pursuit of justice. I just think that the state is a fundamentally improper and clumsy tool at best in the pursuit of justice and protecting rights. And at worst, it's the greatest purveyor of the greatest violator of rights in human existence. So
I
mean,
agree with almost everything you said. Like I really do. I'm on board
so
with
people
the spirit of that.
and
But
people say when people will ask, when did this work? And now, granted, if you don't drink the Christian Kool-Aid, so to speak, maybe this answer won't be as satisfactory, but we have actually a good example in the Bible of a society that existed for centuries in a essential anarchy, which is the nation of Israel during the entirety of the book of Judges and up until 1 Samuel chapter 7. Chapter 8, when they asked for a king. Before that, they lived.
So wait, Brandy, before you jump in,
Okay.
I'm going to hold to this. So I'm not going to argue the validity of historical basis in the things of the Bible, because I agree that societies have existed that worked as described. Like we have had plenty of anarchist societies historically. The problem is they crumble in the praise. Like, so a non-state entity is really great. I think it is a natural way for humans to exist, and it functions beautifully until another state entity shows up and takes you over.
And then there's other, but that it's not. But that see. The reason that argument doesn't really hold any weight is that a defense against that isn't a state, because how many states have crumbled and been taken over by it? So, like, if you're telling me we need a state to protect me from a state, it's like, well, states get conquered by other states all the time throughout history, and even today, there's states that even like maybe they might on paper maintain their sovereignty, but they're usually more or less controlled by either the American Empire or by Russia or China or something like that. So, I mean, at that point, it's like, yes, they're in a not in a moral sense, but just in a practical sense, might kind of makes right. But that's not an argument for that's not really an argument for the state. That's just kind of like actually, if anything,
so how would you have military sort of like influence in a non-state organization? Like, all right, so you have an anarchist presence.
Well, look at what happened. Look what happened kind of in the American Revolution. I mean, they sort of like just formed their militias, and I know they had a little bit of help from France and stuff, but they were able to, fight off the greatest military at the time just through forming their local militias. And then look at
America, right?
Well, right, America, the revolution, and then look at like how the Middle East had, for 20 years we were over there trying to nation build in Iraq and Afghanistan, and these little terrorist groups with AK-47s were able to continually fight off and thwart the American occupation.
Well, that's because culturally, if we nuked them, it would be like very shameful.
Well, so let's go back to this. But so it's interesting because that's a super valid point, right? Like the Revolutionary War, you had a very kind of like limited like militia overthrowing the superpower overseas, but then you're ignoring the fact that there was an anarchist existence that was completely wiped out right before that. Like the revolutionaries didn't live here. They took it from someone who didn't have a state.
Well, listen, if the question is how do I prevent bad things from happening in my anarchy? Well, listen, it is a reality of human existence that bad things happen. I don't think that and again, the same is true under a state. So it's like I don't know what I'm arguing for here. If you're saying how do we protect ourselves from evil people or from people with like rival interests who want to take us over, that is a concern that is equally concerning whether you're in a state society or a stateless society, and you're not always going to win. Bad things happen.
I mean,
but that's not.
I don't see
argument. I don't see how the introduction of a state makes us safer. If anything, I think if you were to have a multi-generational change where people were not, rather than being sort of like raised and indoctrinated in having the belief in the state system, if they rather were raised and just like naturally accepted self-governance and self-autonomy and rejected state tyranny, then if another state tried to come in and take them over, it would be just like a nonstop struggle for them to try to exercise power over that people, because it's like the people aren't just like programmed to submit to things like taxation and state claimed authority just by like the fact like they think that's the normal state of being. It would take an unbalanced amount of resources and time and energy for a nation to do that, to the point where it would almost not be worth it. Now, granted, that would take a generational change, and that is kind of the big challenge that we as libertarians and anarchists face, is trying to change the culture, right? And so that is the battle. But I think that's the ultimate defense, is that really, like, think about it this way: the government is just people, right? The state is just people, and they are a minority of a minority in terms of like the population of our country, right? So the only way that they're able to maintain their power is that people are just indoctrinated from the time that they're children to just believe that like they need to submit to this power. So that is really what needs to be changed. If you change that, then sure, you can go around trying to kill people, but that's
Well, I mean,
you
But
just
that
might be
don't
able
work
to.
very well. That
Well,
emboldens
we
people
have
to
historically
government's
Yeah.
seen
war.
that, okay, go ahead, Brandy. I didn't mean
Well,
to keep
no,
cutting you off.
I was just gonna be like, I'm like, because I'm a minarchist, so I like agree with both of you somewhat and disagree with both of you at the same time.
Look at Brandy
But,
being exposing her true mid over
oh
here.
God, like it's hard, like listening. But
This is also not what we came here to talk about, but
I
like I'm totally
know.
I'm
I
totally
was
down
also
for
gonna-
the anarchy
if we're
minarchy
gonna
bait.
talk, are we gonna talk about if we're gonna? I'm like trying to withhold myself right now because I'm like I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm trying to like close. I'm like no, we're not gonna do this today, Brandy. But let's shift gears for a second because one thing I did want to discuss that you had mentioned was sex negativity within like the Christian space. Like, are
Yes.
people? Can you kind of tell me about that?
Yeah, so this actually ties into the talking about porn at the top of the episode, because as much as I will rail against the societal problems of porn and how porn is destructive to individuals as well, what is fueling the porn problem, and why, like you guys were bringing up that, like, well, a lot of married men and a lot of Christians, both evangelicals and even Catholics, are using porn, and that's all true. And I think that's because the church, and this is very true in the evangelical world that I grew up in, not only fails to offer a good alternative, but what they offer is actually destructive in its own right. And so, I mean, this kind of gets into like I'll get a little personal, like my own personal testimony. I was raised in a very fundamentalist, conservative home, and sex was not really talked about. It was not, talked about. If it was talked about, it was talked about in a very hushed, sort of like taboo tone, and there was no model of what healthy
Mhm.
biblical, like biblically based, Christ honoring relationships between men and women looked like, and how sex is actually a good thing. I think that if we read the Bible, sex is not um, something that people should be ashamed of. Sex is a gift from God. I think that we're supposed to enjoy sex within its proper context, within monogamous marriage. So, but it shouldn't be something that like, well, just because it's for monogamous marriage, therefore we don't talk about it in the broader culture within Christianity. And I think that's the problem. Is a lot of kids are raised, they start having, you know, going through sort of like their sexual awakenings, but they're being raised in environments where that's being sort of like
You're
suppressed.
not allowed
Well,
to talk about
you're
it.
not allowed to talk about it, and
Like,
there's
there
not
is
even
no sex ed.
right,
Because
exactly.
you're
And
not allowed to take sex ed,
my
but
parents
you're
kept
also
me
not
out of
allowed.
sex ed in public
Same. I
school.
wasn't
Yeah,
allowed to take sex ed, but then they weren't going to tell me anything either. So
right,
like you don't
exactly.
get sex ed, but you also don't get like anyone telling you anything. So you kind of have to figure it out on your own. And honestly, I think that that's probably why a lot of people like do look at porn. I
Yes.
like, and I will say, like, I think that women probably it doesn't affect women the same way as men. I've never had a porn addiction. I've never even like I've watched porn. I'm a casual. I haven't
And to
watched
be
porn in
clear, it's
very
much
long time.
it's more
It
of
can
like
happen in the deep. It can happen in the deep end. We can comment on that if you
It's-
want, but
Yeah.
it's a dopamine addiction. It's a what happened
Oh,
to
where'd
Kyle just
Kyle
pieced
go?
out.
bye,
Um,
He might have had a computer issue.
But yeah, the problem is it's just, I mean, porn, it not only, feeds on like, the hormones that teenagers are going through when they start to look at it, but then like it is a huge rush of dopamine, and it does there's debate over the extent to which this happens, because it's all correlative studies, and it's hard to know. Sometimes there's like a chicken and the egg problem. It's like, oh, were these brain chemistry things there before, and that made them more susceptible to porn, or is it the opposite, that the porn did the rewiring? It's hard to say, because it's sort of hard to do these sort of hard to find someone and be like, hey, we're going to start exposing you to porn at 13 and and then track your brain development over the next 10 years. But there's a good argument, but there's just the understanding how the brain works and how the reward system works in the brain with dopamine and all that. It does make sense from a scientific perspective.
Why does it affect women differently? Because I will say it does seem like there are women that get addicted to porn, but I will say that it's not.
Well, I think it's just because men with their sex drives are just driven more to that outlet, and so that becomes an easier outlet for them to pursue. Men are much more, I think, by average visual when it comes to sex and things like that. So I just don't think, on average, I think that's why the difference of rates of addiction would exist.
So like men's
ahead.
biological drive is going to be to have lots of sex because look, we want to pass on our offspring. So like, of course, men.
What do you
if they're
call
offered,
an addiction to porn, though?
So non-chemical addiction.
I would say
Right,
an addiction
it's
to
more-
porn,
How
at
much
least
porn
yeah.
is an addiction? Is it once
I
a week?
I would say an addiction to
Once
porn
a
would probably
day?
be
Multiple
if it's
times?
stopping
Multiple
if it's
times a day,
stopping
yeah.
you from doing
Okay.
your daily activities in any reasonable way. So like if like you're at work and you have to go jack off on your lunch break or something like that, you have a problem. Right?
You like Brandy's laughing at that. That is not. I've never done that, but there was a person.
There
at
are guys
my
who
work
do that though.
who left his
Yes.
Bluetooth
I
connected
work
to his
remote,
phone.
so I don't
He,
know.
he left his Bluetooth speaker connected to his phone, went to the bathroom, and we're all working, and then we start hearing all this moaning and stuff coming from his speaker while he's in the bathroom.
Classic good times.
Yeah.
Um,
it's like, dude, like you can't wait till you get home, or so yeah, I mean it is it's the same way that people get like addicted to food or sugar or anything else. Like it's not like a chemical addiction, but it's just like people form these
It's a psychological
loops in the
it's a
brain.
psychological
Yeah,
addiction based on dopamine and reward systems and
Well, and it's
things like
interesting.
that.
The genetics of addiction are actually that it's almost the same. Like people who are basically like the genetic like markers for addiction there are so chemical ones. There are likelihoods for specific chemical ones, but for the non-chemical addictions, people who the addictive personality is more the genetic like makeup versus so the people who are, I think, likely to become addicted to porn might already have an addictive personality. It's really just kind of one of those things. And a lot of the time, the best that they can hope for is to get addicted to something relatively positive, like people who are very like, over like gym goers or like fitness people or adrenaline junkies, whatever, there's all kinds of like flavors of that. But you can also condition yourself along that. Like, so porn can start out as a useful habit, and then you can just get into a lifelong feedback of like, oh, porn never lets me down. Porn never hurts me. And
It's easier, like, because like we were talking about earlier, like porn is the easy way out of what you compared to what you should be, like your sex drive should be urging you to self-improve and to find someone to pair bond with and have that healthy outlet. But that's more work, right? That doesn't work. Our brains
It requires
were sort of
effort.
wired. Right. Our brains are like, we would rather do the thing that's easy. Relationships are tough. And I struggled throughout my marriage with a porn addiction. And you get into this spiral where you feel guilty that you aren't having the sexual relationship that you want to have with your spouse, and you're suffering from erectile dysfunction, and you're suffering from all these you're suffering from physical and emotional negative outcomes. But then in that depression, in that sort of like anger and guilt, then your coping mechanism ends up being more porn, because that's the habit you've built up in terms of like something that you do that makes you feel better.
Is
And
this
so
a
that
chicken
creates
and
a
the egg problem though? Because it's like, was there a lack of sex? Like, I could see it as like
there was not a lack of sex at
sex.
the beginning of our relationship. So I mean, at
No?
least in my
Or,
case, no. If anything, it was the opposite. We had a lot of sex in the beginning, but then as my porn addiction reared its ugly head, and reasserted itself, so it was my fault that the sex decreased. And actually, for most of our relationship, that's been a complaint of my wife's, and I was not honest with her, unfortunately, for many years about the problems that I had. I came clean with her many years ago, and then started going to counseling, both through the church and through a Christian licensed psychologist and stuff, and worked through it. And although what really helped me was more of what I would call a spiritual experience that we could get into, but it's maybe that'd be a different time, but more of a spiritual experience that actually helped me to really overcome it, and now actually have a relationship with my wife that's more than just emotional and us just being roommates, but one that we're actually able to enjoy the gift of sex that God has given us. Part of to bring this back to the purity culture problem, part of how the church is contributing to this is that they are making, and Brandy, you were kind of touching on this earlier, like the difference between like lust and coveting and desire. There is nothing, this is what the church is getting wrong. There is nothing wrong with sexual desire, and there's nothing even wrong. You're not immediately lusting the moment that you find someone attractive. Right? Like that is not lusting. Lusting is like if you are intensely focused on, like having a focus on someone else, and like you're like, oh man, I'm really desiring them, and then like, well, that's not my wife, that's not my partner, they're married to someone else, etc. But that desire itself is not something that is bad and to feel ashamed of. That is a normal part of how we are wired, and what we have to learn is just to be like, you know what, I have desires, and God gave me those desires, and he wants me to use those desires towards that which he has given me. God led me to have a beautiful wife, and that is where he wants me to have that. And it's not wrong to have a desire for my wife. And that might sound weird, but you have to understand, in the purity culture of like the evangelical world I grew up in, and then kind of combine this almost a little bit in a twisted way with like radical modern day feminism, you get from both sides this, like, you need to be careful not to be objectifying women, and not to be, like, if you're having sex for pleasure, or because like you want to, like, there's something inherently like bad about that. Like, they almost try to make it that like sex is only good if it's this like,
they moralize it, essentially.
They almost try to make it like it should be like this like like purely like spiritual or just like functional thing of the relationship.
Put it on
like,
a pedestal.
Or you get the, oh, it's like, yeah, like you do it because listen, like these things are icky, but they're at least okay if you do it with your wife, but they're still icky. Like they're not celebrated as a beautiful and natural and important part of the human experience. As
I just watched the Christian video on this, where it was a couple, and they were trying to make the argument that blowjobs were good, like that it was okay to do in marriage, but the woman couldn't even say the fucking word. She literally couldn't. She was like, oral sex, like she couldn't even say the word. And I was like, do you think like we can like look at your face and you're,
but that's taboos though. Like that could be a saying it publicly to other people is the taboo, and not the inherent act itself.
No, I know, but it's very hard for me to imagine that woman gives a good blowjob.
That's a separate concern.
I'm sorry. No,
Jacob.
General, my argument is just like I think that like the shame of even talking about it, right? Like I think that this is like a very what's that woman's name? This like very Christian wife. I don't know. I have them all like muted for my own mental health, but there's this one like Christian trad wife person, and she like posted about how women need to have sex with their husbands, and like even if they don't, like she was like, this one woman is like struggling to have sex with her husband, but she needs to do it anyway. And in my mind I'm like, but
that sounds bad to me.
Okay, well, let me put a point in this real quick, because I think this is actually really, really important. If your wife does not want to have sex with you, then like you should deeply consider that as a man. Like either
Okay.
you haven't like the main reason is probably that you're not living up to your burden of performance. And this is a
Yep.
good red pill concept of basically like you have to remain disciplined. And the same things that you did to attract your wife, your girlfriend, or the plate, whoever it is, you have to continue to do those things to maintain being an impressive person and an attractive person. Like if I gained, the 50, 60 pounds that I had on me when I first met my wife, she wouldn't want anything to do with me because I looked like a loser back then. But the fact that I continue to develop is what maintained our attraction to one another.
Yeah.
I, I
What if people like can people not grow apart? Is that like incorrect
Well, it's
or
not just that. I actually think that men really don't understand like female sexuality, including the red pill, which I got into arguments with Rolo about
It was pretty
very
entertaining.
recently.
It was pretty
Very
entertaining.
recently. Well, because not every woman's the same, and some women actually, and I do think that this goes into like the Christian thing. Some because of like kind of like this brainwashing you get when you're younger and you feel like Christian like sex is shameful and that you're not supposed to do it, you're not supposed to feel these feelings, right? Like they get like because sexuality with women, which one thing I do agree with some of the red pill people, what they say is like for a woman it starts in their head. That's somewhat true, but there is an aspect that is physical. The thing that I think is misleading is that like you can't say like, oh well, if you just get hot your girlfriend's gonna want to, or if you're a high value man it's gonna make her be able to like
be sexual?
enjoy
Yeah, yeah.
sex. It's just not true.
Oh well, I mean, it's about
The
genuine
worst
desire.
sex I
Like if
ever
the
had
woman
was
has
with this Red Sox player, okay, and he was hot and he sucked
like
and
Well,
he's
Kyle,
hot now.
what about
it would
people
depend.
like there are people who like have low libidos that are like coming from like
Mhm.
their biology, that you have people who are like like asexual, you have people who or just like the person that they were attracted to has like you were in a band and then you get a corporate job, right? And now they're like, oh no, I really only like fucking
But that's
rock
because
stars.
you lost the genuine desire
Well,
for that
that's
person.
one
Right. But
thing.
what I'm saying is, if that is a specific thing, so you maybe even bettered yourself in the process, but of what your own vision of what bettering yourself was. So what is the move there right now? So
But you
I
guys
think
are still I still think that that's still correlating it to like, because it's not understanding that like some women can't come like
I agree
wave
with you,
like the
Brandy. I'm
same as
trying to
others.
put this on Kyle and Jacob in terms of like, so
Sure.
what is the move when
Okay.
those differences are not the oh, I just let myself go and had 60 pounds, but are fundamental.
So listen, I think that there are definitely people who get married who shouldn't have gotten married.
I
That
would
has
agree
to
with
do
that,
that
yeah.
has to do, and that might be like an unpopular thing for me as a Christian to say. It's not because I have a low view of marriage. I have a high view of marriage. And I just think that like, listen, like, yes, like as Christians, if you get married and you did it like the proper way, then I do have a high like there you need to show me some abuse or something for
You
you
have an
to like
expectation.
yeah.
Wait,
But like
what's
it's
the
just
what's the
people
proper way? Sorry, I'm not trying to call you out. I don't know what that means.
I mean, just in a generic sense, I guess, like if you had two people who are Christians, and they want to get married, and so then like they find each other, they have a relationship, they meet with a spiritual, counselor or mentor, like a pastor or priest or someone, decide that they have the same values, that they're, they want to build a life together that has Christ at the center, and then you commit to that, then it's like, okay, I'm much more critical about you ending that than I am like, two random people who weren't Christians, who didn't have that faith, who just kind of like, oh, we just wanted to get married because whatever the tax benefits, or we're living together, or they just thought it was a cool idea. It's like, yeah, that doesn't really mean that. Now, listen, I would still like prefer that people try to work on relationships, but that doesn't. What I'm trying to say is I'm not going to like be naive about this, or from the Christian perspective where I do view divorce as bad. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who got together who
Should get
shouldn't have
divorced.
gotten
Sure,
together.
sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
because they got together for the wrong reasons. Now, if like you're in one of those relationships, and maybe it's one of the, I've seen God work miracles in people's relationships. I'm not trying to discount that. Like there are people who have testimonies where they got into marriages for like maybe not really deep or really good reasons, and then like one of them comes to Christ, and then the other one comes to Christ, and they are able to build something off of, maybe less than ideal foundations. And I think like that's preferable to divorce in my book, but that doesn't mean that like I'm going to have some kind of like visceral judgmental reaction to people who get divorced in contexts that are different than the one that I described as the ideal one. I'd be much more judgmental of the people who got married in that context and then got a divorce later on, unless
I
they
mean,
showed me outside of like abuse or things that we would all agree are, kind of
yeah, and
objectively
I
good
understand that.
reasons.
I mean, like, that's always like the sort of case. But I mean, even as you described, like you're almost setting yourself up for cultural pressure, right? So like within a Christian community, it sounds like there's going to be pressure to get married and get married correctly, right? And
Yeah.
Yeah, but
so
I mean,
isn't
that's. Do you think cultural pressure is a bad thing though? Because I think having expectations amongst your peers, if
That's a
you
good thing.
respect
Yeah.
them, which is a pretty big caveat, I think social expectation is actually a good thing because it
I think
encourages
pressuring
people.
people to get married younger is not a good thing.
I agree with
Well,
that.
Personally.
I mean,
Because
if
I
it's
think that
within your
this is where Christians fuck up. I think that they should
sure.
let people take a few years to figure themselves out, because I think that you can make really
Rum
fucking bad
I
Springer,
decisions.
wanna
bro.
so
Rum Springer.
I want to agree with you with a slight caveat. I don't think that you should encourage people to just be like, you need to get married now because you're young. Rather, what I would
Right.
say is that I want to encourage people to get married like when you find the right person, don't
Yeah.
worry about like my wife and I got married when we were 21. So it's like we were very young. We have 5 kids now. I think it, all things being equal, I think that there are advantages to getting married young, but that doesn't mean that that's right for everybody. So I wouldn't say
Right.
there's some like universal, definitely always get married young. But
Yes. I agree with that. I think like, but the problem is when when it's pushed on you that you need to get married young, you hit a certain age and it's about get married now, right? I don't think that that's good.
I
And I
don't
think
think
that that
so.
makes people get into bad relationships. And I've seen it many times
I
where
think that
people
there should
feel
be.
this pressure and they have to get married. And like that Sovereign Bra guy, I feel like that's exactly what he does, which we're like talking about the
Yeah.
Christ pill, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's all like pushing these young girls to say that they need to get married immediately. And I think that that is not good advice, because I think that that could potentially make them get into bad
So
relationships because they don't even fully understand who they are yet.
so there's two things there. One, there should not be a inordinate amount of pressure to like hit the panic button and be like, you need to get married as young as possible
Right.
and make bad decisions out of that. I do think that there should just be honest conversations about a couple things. One, just basic biological realities about reproduction, and if you want to have kids, just keeping those in mind. Not that it's impossible to have kids when you're older in your 30s, but you just need to understand like if you're like, I want to have 5 kids and you're starting at like 30, you're gonna have a much harder time doing that than my wife and I started when we were 22 having kids. So so really what you have to get down to is expectations in terms of like what are your life aspirations and goals.
Yes, I
If
actually agree with that.
Yeah, so like, and that's gonna be different for everybody. Some people, it's like they might only want to have one or two kids. My wife and I, when we got together, we talked about it. We were both on the same page immediately. Like, we wanted to have 5 or 6 kids and potentially even adopt. When she gets to the point where she's older and doesn't want to have any more biological kids of our own. So, but we had the same values and pursued that together
Yes.
from a young age, and that's what sustained us even through some of the rough patches that I kind of alluded to in our relationship, because we had that common ground of values that we were building our life upon. And so yeah, I think that matters more. And then like talking to young people and being like, well, what do you want out of life? Because if you want a family and want a big family, then don't rush, but also like don't put
Understand
it
that you probably want to make this a focus at some
put
point if you're
keep
considering having a
yourself
family.
yeah, like keep yourself open to the possibility of getting married young, and be willing to put yourself out there when opportunities arise where you might meet someone, and like don't be like, oh well, this person might be really good for me, but like, this isn't the right time. I should wait until I'm 28.
Yeah.
Like I think that can be dumb sometimes.
Well, yeah,
Right.
I think it does depend on if it's the right person. And to go back to what we were talking about in regards to like Christians and like sex negative and stuff, like I grew up like fundamental Baptist, and one thing my mom told me, and she told me this like once I lost my virginity, which I wasn't supposed to do. I was 19, which was like old for like everyone else, but I was 19, and my mom told me that sex isn't something that you enjoy. It's something that you do for your husband.
Yeah, like
And
well, imagine the perspective
that
that that's yeah,
no,
you don't
imagine
enjoy it.
no.
But I had enjoyed sex. I enjoyed sex, and I knew that I enjoyed it. And my mom told me that you're not supposed to, it's not something that you enjoy. It's something that you do for your husband. It is like a thing that you do for them. It's like your like wifely duty, your gift to them type of thing. And
Yeah,
I
no,
remember
that's
thinking in my head, I'm like,
so bad.
what? Like but I do enjoy it. Like, what are you saying? Like, and then I'm
Yeah.
like, so my mom never enjoyed sex. Okay. Like, I don't like, and I think that there are probably a lot of Christian women that might say that. I don't know.
Mhm.
That's the thing. It's like, I don't know how many, like, I don't know if my experience is unique or if this is common within like Baptist or
I
Catholic or
so
whatever, where
I
they kind of are pushing that narrative.
I used to think, like, when I first met my wife and she had a high sex drive, I was like, as a young I was like, "Man, I'm lucky." But I actually just think that she probably has a normal sex drive for a woman, and there's just a lot of, like, misconception
No,
and
I
false
think she
teaching
thought you
about.
were. I think she thought you were an attractive guy and wanted to enjoy your company. I'm serious. She had genuine
Se-
desire for you. That's a good thing.
but sex drive is not like you can have people who are super attracted and still have low sex drives, and the people who
Yes.
have high sex drive, like
Right,
that's
I mean,
those are two totally separate things, guys.
But she
Facts.
was attracted to him.
no, I'm
Sure, I
saying I'm
believe
saying
that.
I'm
I'm not
saying
arguing that
in
point.
sort of the Christian evangelical world I was brought up in, I didn't think it was even possible for, like, a woman to pursue a man to, like, wanna have sex with him. And so, when my wife was, like, actually pursuing and, like, wanting to, like, she was the one initiating more than me, I was like,
Mhm.
"Wow, that's so unusual." But I'm not saying that men and women are the same, in terms of their sexual drives and desires, because 'cause they're not. But I also sometimes think that the differences can be exaggerated, or the gap between them can be exaggerated, to some extent. Because I think there's a spectrum. There's gonna be, uh
Sure.
you know what I mean? There's gonna be some people who you'll probably find some women who, uh, want sex more than their husbands. So
Well, and I do think that like this aspect of this kind of almost brainwashing that Christians can sometimes do to people where they they almost make them feel like wanting it isn't good. Like that's not a
yeah,
good thing to desire. It's not a good thing. So a lot of women don't I think it can be very subconscious. I don't even think that they're fully aware of it. But like they can get just like trapped into that kind of like repression. They're just repressed, you know? And
but
so
it won't stay there. So then they're gonna
I
find outlets, and
I don't know,
that's what
man.
leads to cheating, that's what leads to affairs, that's what leads to a lot of the rampant high uses of porn. So I
What
think,
is there a better one, cheating versus porn? I assume cheating is worse, but I actually am curious based on some of your earlier.
uh I mean, I think I don't know. I guess it's less bad to watch porn, but
I
I
feel
also
like
kind of
porn
view watching.
probably.
So from a
I
Christian
love how there's like
perspective,
a
I view.
hierarchy of sin now. Come
I
on.
love hierarchies of vice. I mean, to me, that's
No,
how
because it's
you
just not
navigate the gray
accurate.
area. But sure, I agree. But I'm saying, what to me, it's good to understand, like, what is the
There
sort of
is
like.
so there's just a different, like, someone who's married and who is, like, secretly watching porn. I do view that as a form of being unfaithful to your spouse, but it's hard for me to, like, equate that to all, like, premeditating going out and having an actual affair with
Sure,
another
sure.
woman, you know what I mean? So it's like, because one is like you're looking at someone and doing something by yourself, the other one is like actively engaging in a
Oh, I
adulterous
don't think that this
affair,
is from a
so.
Christian perspective. This is from a secular perspective. Because from a Christian perspective, they would not be different because no sin is above another sin. So
I actually think that's a fault. So all
what
sin is equal in that it separates us from God, but that does not mean that all
Yes.
sin is equal in terms of earthly consequence.
No, but
Um,
the earthly consequence is not Christian. That is the earthly consequence.
no, it's
Like, I
both.
agree
The
with
earthly
you.
consequence
It's like
comes from
murder has a higher consequence than watching porn. I think we can all agree with that. Like, but it doesn't mean that the person, like, in it, I think that if you are addicted to social media, if you have any of these, if you are addicted to anything, in my opinion, you are sinning. You are missing the mark. You are becoming
yes,
uh
but not all. Again, I think the teaching is that all sin separates us from God, but that doesn't
yeah.
mean that all sin is equal, because that'd be like saying like uh I'm I'm like lying is not the same as like being a child rapist. I mean,
Do you think that but it isn't
We'll
it the
yield that
same
point. There
in
we
God's
go.
eyes?
like I hate to
Isn't
go
it
like
the same in God's eyes though, if you think about
it's
it?
not the
Like,
same in God's eyes. But the only thing that's the same is that it is sin, and all sin separates us from God. But
yes.
God doesn't like look at like God doesn't have the same reaction to you lying as he does
Well,
to a
I
child
think it's like
rapist.
love your neighbor as yourself, right? Is like it's like love God and so if you're harming someone else, that makes the sin more worse because it goes against like the two main commandments that Jesus said, right? But in my opinion, I I get what you're saying, but I don't like this idea where we're saying like porn is worse than
And listen,
infidelity. I think that like in it, to a degree, if you're going to say it's bad, they're all the same,
well, I
right?
thought I
Like
said infidelity was worse than porn. I didn't say porn was worse
Eh,
than
I
infidelity.
mean,
no, yes,
there are definitely shades of gray there. I mean, I think that's reasonable to say that, like, hey, if you're jacking off by yourself, yeah, should you be doing it? Probably not. But that's the difference between like
And
adultery and
I
but
didn't
we're
say
cheating on
one
your
was
taking
wife.
like
good. I was
culture.
just
We're
like if
taking from an
It's less
earthly perspective.
worse.
well, I mean, I was like, it's not that I would. It's not like I'm saying what I don't want to say is that like, because it's easy for people who are addicted to porn to do this to say like, well, I'm doing this and I mean it's bad, but like I'm not actually going out having an affair and actually cheating on her. But it's still it's adultery of the heart in a sense, is what Jesus says, and it is something
Mhm.
you should take seriously. I do view it as a form of being unfaithful to your spouse. I'm just saying like in terms of it was Ren who asked the question, like, what's better? I was like, I don't know. I guess watching porn is not better. I wouldn't use the word better. I
Less
would just
bad.
say it's just like
Less bad.
Less
Yeah.
it is
bad.
less destructive. Put it that way.
Is a couple watching porn together like not betrayal of the heart? Like is that's like basically the equivalent of like doing a drug like any other vice together?
I have a hard time with that one. I think that and this was something Brandy and I touched on when we were having our Twitter exchange, because like it does kind of one depend on how broadly you define porn. Like I'm not against like things like what is like Kuma Sutra or like other things where you're like looking at positions and doing things to like spice up your sex life. Like I'm not a prude. But I don't know where I would draw the line in terms of like where that crosses over into something that I would say is probably
But
not
these are all
good.
arbitrary.
Well,
They're all
it is
arbitrary
arbitrary.
lines.
It is
They're
arbitrary
made
because there's
up.
well, I mean, I don't know if it is ambiguous where the line would be, and at that point, I would preach personal conviction, like within the sanctity of the marriage, within your between you and your spouse, in your marriage bed, like what you guys do. Like if you're doing it together and you're on the same page, it's not my business. So it's between you and God. Go by your personal convictions would be the best advice I would give. But in terms of to go anything beyond that, I mean, I think it's one thing to like do something towards the end of spicing up your life. I do think that where it could go wrong and where I think people might ignore personal convictions is when like and this happens. There are some people who say like they need porn to have sex with their spouse, or like and they're almost doing it in a way where like they're not having sex with their spouse. They are using their spouse's body and having a fantasy go on in their head. And that is where I don't think that it would be arbitrary for me to say I think that is wrong, but I can't read people's minds and hearts and intents and be the judge for all people. God's the judge. I'll let him I'll let him fulfill that role. I don't really need to uh, go around worrying about that too much. I don't think. Although I just think in general, I my hope and prayer would be that the porn industry would decrease. Although it's very unlikely to happen. But I wish that this stuff was just not as widely accessible and easy to consume. So
Well, the internet does that. I mean, that's capitalism, industrial revolution. Like, I feel like the hard part with a lot of Christians and actually kind of reconciling like your political point of view, like because it is almost impossible to make it not happen without a state. Like without an enforcer. You can say culturally shame, but like what does that entail? Because also as a libertarian, you don't believe in force. So you wouldn't want to like murder people because they were sex workers or because they were doing things that you didn't want, right? Like so
no,
I
no.
think that this is where Christians have a hard time reconciling this idea
By the way,
because
Jesus is a descendant of a sex worker, so that's a true story. A sex worker actually converted to Judaism, and you can trace down through her line the birth of Jesus. Anyway, just one of those
yeah.
cool facts that of the Bible.
Yeah.
Like no one would make that up, in my opinion. But I hear, yeah, obviously, I think I said it's very unlike. My prayer and hope would be that it would decrease and be unaccessible, but I really don't see that happening, especially in the age of the internet. In terms of what I mean by like culturally shame, I mean mainly it's just to like keep that stuff invisible, which I think we kind of agreed on. And then that'd be on the secular level. Within Christian levels, I think it's just kind of like having conversations about what Christian norms of sex and things are, and there's good and bad ways to do that. It's largely bad right now, but I'm wary of the like progressive Christians often just they react to the errors of like right-wing fundamentalism and knee-jerk react the whole way to the opposite side of the spectrum and commit different errors. So I think it's
What would be your
unfortunate.
solution? What do you think that how should Christians approach this stuff?
I think for one, talking about sex, and modeling healthy relationships is key. I grew up in a household where I can count on maybe I don't even need all the fingers of one hand to count the amount of times I saw my dad show affection to my mom, like even just like a peck on the cheek or lips or anything. So for one, I think
That's
not being
sad.
ashamed. Yeah, for one, it's modeling healthy relationships both emotionally and physically. I'm not afraid to come up and kiss my wife. In fact, we kind of enjoy, like the kids kind of get grossed out by it, but like we kiss all the time in front of our kids, and we cuddle together. I try to show her a lot of affection, and have that be something that the kids grow up around and say like that's normal. Like husbands and wives should love each other, and that includes physical intimacy. And when they're, and every kid's different. When the kids are old enough, you start talking to them more and more about those things as they have questions. Have a healthy relationship with your kids where they trust you and they want to come and talk to you about these things. That's really important. Really, a lot of this comes down to parenting. It is really, and the church plays a role in that too, I think, in terms of what the churches teach. But ultimately, everything comes down to the parents' responsibility in raising up children who have non-distorted, non-pathological views of these things, and that's mostly done through.
Can I ask one question?
Sorry guys, I gotta step out. It's been a great chat.
Okay.
Jacob, it's been a pleasure. See you guys.
Thanks, Ray.
Bye.
Appreciate it, brother.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Do you think masturbation is a sin? It's like without porn, imagination.
Yeah, I would tend to say, that's in that area of a personal conviction. Like it's not a blanket yes or no. Like it would probably depend. It would probably depend on the context and how much you're you're doing it and why you're doing it. Like if you're in a situation where you cannot have sex with your spouse, and you're just kind of missing that physical intimacy, I don't
But
necessarily think that would
isn't
be.
masturbation natural? Like because I don't know. I think that it's like a natural thing. So I always wondered this because it was considered a sin where when I grew up. So I'm just curious as someone that doesn't go to church. I still consider myself a Christian, though a lot of Christians wouldn't. I wonder like what is like the common is it considered a sin or no?
So I would say that like a majority of the time it's spoken of as a sin,
Exactly.
but I tend to take a bit more again of a nuanced approach. I mean, I think like a lot of things it can become a sin. I mean, if you're doing it in a very excessive or disordered fashion. But again, I think there's like if it, I mean, like if you're traveling or separated from your spouse for an extended period of time, or your spouse had some kind of injury or some kind of like health crisis or something, they're hospitalized and you're missing them. It's like I'm not like
Come on, everyone starts like this is the thing is that like I think that this is what like actually like fucks kids up too is that like a lot of kids just naturally have that as a young child. So
oh,
like
and I
and then
would
if you
never if
say
I
that
if
it's a sin, and this is without porn. If you say it's a sin, then they're gonna feel shameful about this like experience that just naturally happens and they're not gonna be able to
Yeah,
like
I mean, maybe I'm not being clear enough. I think what I'm saying is that it's not inherently a sin. I
yeah.
think that it can be
if
depending
in
on how you do it.
excess.
Right.
If it
Yeah.
becomes
Which is kind of
habitual.
true of any it's true of most things.
So then maybe
There's
porn isn't a sin if it's not habitual? No.
yeah, um yeah, I don't know. It's again, in general, probably on 99% of things, I tend to take the line from Paul, which is everything is permissible, although not everything is beneficial. Everything has its
Yeah.
proper time and place. Again, I struggle to identify where porn. But again, I guess porn is such a broad term, right? So I guess there are certain types of porn, and it's kind of like I'm speaking from like the experience of like you know uh, the years of being addicted to porn, the porn I was exposed to as a young person. I have a hard time going, yeah, it was bad I was exposed to it at 13. But if I was exposed to it in this context at this time, it would have been fine. I just can't conceive of that. But again, there as we were discussing earlier, it is arbitrary where we draw the line as to what is and isn't porn. And I guess there's hardcore versions and then there's soft versions, and I would encourage personal conviction when it comes to those gray areas. And so I guess like maybe in those gray areas, yeah, like maybe there is a proper uh, time and place, but um, between a man and a woman in a relationship, I would tend not to be very legalistic about it. So I don't know if that is satisfactory enough of a compromise, maybe.
Well, I mean, yeah, so I think that the one thing that how I see it is that with my faith, it's about a personal relationship with God that I'm constantly seeking. I don't put God in a box because how it works for me is that I think that to pretend that I fully understand what God wants or what God thinks is like hubristic. I'm a human, I don't fucking know. So I'm just constantly trying to seek that, right? And seek that relationship. I think a lot of Christians create this like dogmatic view where they think that they fully understand. They have it all figured out. They know that there's this rule book and this is what they're supposed to do. And uh and if they follow the rule book, they're fine. And I actually think that that's like a distraction from like that personal relationship with God. Like I think that when you focus on sin, not sinning, all that stuff, it becomes like you kind of lose your place. You lose the relationship and you lose the part of seeking God. So which is pretty much like has been kind of my take, which is I think hard for me to explain. It's not that I'm like porn is good or I think that it can be bad. I think that, like a lot of things, I
I guess so. Maybe this is the distinction that needs to be made. I think that lust is the sin, and I think that porn has incredibly if I'm going to define porn in the broadest sense, right? Then it has a very limited utility where I can see it being used for anything other than lust. Um, Now, if you see, I want to be clear, like if you are exposed to porn and you're not driven to lust when you see it. Like, I'm not saying it's not one of those things that's like, oh no, I caught the porn. Like it was up in front of my screen and I looked at it for 3 seconds and I've sinned. Like, no, it is the lust. So I guess it's like if it doesn't affect you and you see it, uh, and you're just like, okay, whatever, then I guess I don't see that as sinning. But I think most contexts of porn use are people, uh, you know, self-pleasuring themselves while watching it, and that's where I go, okay, well, I think using porn in that way, I tend to find it hard to imagine how that can be, in a Christian sense at least, explained as not at least a disordered use of sex. And I
But I
would
think a
distinguish
lot
that.
of things that we experience in the modern world would be, if it existed then, I think that they would have been considered sins. And it all comes down to personal responsibility, right?
Right.
Like social media didn't exist
Well,
then.
you're
And
also
I think that there
judged
are a lot
for.
of people that are very addicted to social media.
Sure,
And I
sure.
struggle with it as well, you know? Like I'm sure that if Twitter and TikTok existed when Jesus was around, he would have been like,
Oh, for sure.
anti. He would have made like blanket statements, right? But I think that all comes down to like the fact that, yeah, these things are not good because they do, like you said, take you away from God. But
Right.
it's like, and then it's like, okay, well, are you gonna just become like a monastic Christian? Which,
No, I would
like
I
I
would say
respect that, but like,
I would say what you were getting at is actually the important thing here, which is the relationship. But I think
yeah.
that in your walk, in your faith journey,
Hmm.
I think you're held more and more accountable the more that is revealed to you and the more as you grow in that relationship. So a non-Christian who then becomes a new Christian, that like I'm not gonna like throw at them all of these things and expectations, because I think that that is something that for the most part you will naturally come to in your faith journey as you seek God out. So what a lot of Christians get wrong is they approach a lot of the things I'm talking about in terms of what I think is generally described as right and wrong or ordered or
Hmm.
disordered from the Christian perspective, but they see how the Bible defines things and they want to apply it in a legalistic fashion. But
Hmm.
that's not actually, I think, what the Bible prescribes. Rather, I think what it prescribes is that you will become convicted of of the things that God wants to convict you of in the proper time and order as you grow closer to God. And everyone's at a different part in that faith journey, and I think that's why personal conviction is like there are some obviously like clear like universals that like everybody agrees upon, and I think I forget the passage where Paul is talking about this, or was it might have been Peter, but they where this doctrine comes from, where they basically say like here are the things that are like absolutely we don't do. And then everything else is a matter of personal conviction. Um, so I think there are some things that generally end up being personal convictions for mature people of faith, but you can't like go to someone who is new to the faith or at a different part in that journey and hold them to the same standard that you're holding yourself to because God put something on your heart to be convicted of. A good rule of thumb is that if you're earnestly seeking after God, and you're seeking to put first what he wants for you in your life, then if you get convicted of something, you shouldn't ignore it. That's kind of my basic rule.
Mm. I also think that this is so kind of the issue with the Christ bill is that they're kind of using, they call it the Christ pill, which I also fucking hate. Like I'm like
Yeah.
like they're turning Christianity into like this like cultural like
It's a
movement, but
brand.
like in my opinion, I fucking hate that, and I think that it's like almost like denigrating it. It's denigrating religion, which I
It
think
could
is
be, yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah. So
something
like Brandon
holy.
and I, yeah, Brandy and I were talking about this before the show, and this kind of stuff drives me nuts because I believe that religion is supposed to be something very, very personal to people. And like, not to say you should practice it exclusionary of other people, but like this idea that you're going to brand it, and like specifically this fucking sovereign broad dude who's the most insufferable sanctimonious prick on Twitter. Um, he told this huge story and was like very, very touching. And then right after that, he says, join my dating network and you can find a woman like this. Like, dude, go fuck yourself, all right? Like, you're literally wearing your religion as a skin suit to sell your dating network. It's fucking disgusting. And you know what the worst part is? You're going to make more atheists that way. You know why?
Yeah,
Because
I
there's going to
agree.
be guys, they're going to be guys, they're going to sign up for this. And then just because they didn't Christian hard enough for you, for your dating group, or the girls just joined because they wanted to sleep with Chase, and then none of this stuff works out for the guys, then they get pissed off and think, oh, well, this is God's fault. So guess what? God doesn't fucking exist because he didn't bring me my trad wife because Chase fucking the charlatan sold me this fucking dating network. This kind of shit drives me nuts. I hate dishonest marketing, and it's exactly what the fuck this is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what people mean by Christ build in general. It does
Right,
it does
though?
it does sort of, but I can see how it comes across almost as if Christianity is sort of like a fad or like a piece of clothing that you can
Yes.
put
Right.
on, or
And
like
it's
a
not.
or like emo, like, or it's like,
Yeah.
it's like like an aesthetic or something.
Right.
And I don't like that because Christianity exists across different cultures, different time periods, and
Exactly.
takes on very different aesthetics. I mean, my dad was a pastor and missionary who did a lot of work with in Africa, and then with African churches that had plants here in America. And let me tell you something. Um, when you like when you grow up in like evangelical world and you experience church that way, and then you go to an all African church service that, like, literally people from Africa, and they're doing church the way that they did it in Africa, and then you realize we're practicing the same religion. That's one of the most like broadening experiences I've ever had in my life. Realizing that people are worshiping God, worshiping Christ as their King and Lord, and doing it in such different ways, but then it's like, but we have that same we have that shared identity in Christ, in a way that so it's like it says in Galatians, there is no Jew nor Greek, there is no male nor female, there is no
Mhm.
slave or free, for all are one in Christ Jesus. And that's what it's speaking of, is that,
Galatians, let go.
yeah. I mean, I've been like doing a bunch of episodes on dispensationalism lately, so I've been like stuck in the book of Galatians for like 4 months, but it is such a, I mean, if I was going to get people to read a book of the Bible that wasn't the Gospels, it would probably be Galatians or Romans. It's a toss-up, but I mean, there's
Yeah.
just so much good in
Those are like the
Galatians.
2 books that Paul actually wrote, so it makes sense.
Yeah, some people think that Paul wrote Hebrews. It's like, I don't know. I mean, it could have been one of those things where Paul had someone write for him. I don't. Anyway, that's a whole different
Well,
rabbit
and
hole we could go down.
I'm a little nervous, like, that people are using Jesus as a grift and, like, Christianity as a grift,
Oh,
like
for
what
sure, for
Yes.
sure.
Shut the Punk Up just said. And what sucks is that, like, I think that it's actually going to be harmful to Christianity. I don't think that that's a
Mhm.
benefit. Like, I think like someone like Sovereign Bras, like, if we're bringing people to like being a Christian, it's all
It's like
good.
he's
And
a
it's
false
like,
prophet.
yes, well, because if you think about it, it's like, no, because if they don't understand it and they're looking at it in this particular lens, like, it is just like like, literally, like, it's cultural
There's
Christianity, which really pisses me off. So, like,
cultural Christianity is not Christianity. Like
yeah,
I mean,
but they still
it's
say that they're this isn't the same as like, so there's the cultural Christians that are like basically atheists but are like but we like the
yeah,
ethics.
Jordan Peterson types.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But like, this is a person that says that he's a Christian but is actually is a cultural Christian though. Like, it is using Christianity in like this cultural way
to to
while
to to be a Christian means that you profess that Christ is your Lord and your Savior, and that you have had an experience of that in
King.
which you say that you have been born again. Like, I don't think you can have an encounter like that is the claim of being a Christian, is that you've been born again in Christ. It's like
but people can
that
claim that.
sure,
But
people
that's the
people
thing.
and,
Like,
they can
I
say
think
all
it's
the right
deeper than
things.
that. It's deeper than like what the Nicene Creed said. I don't like subscribe to like orthodoxy either, so I'm like a heterodox. But like I think it's deeper than that because it does come down to that personal relationship with God. I think that that's where really what it is for me. It's seeking God, personal relationship. You seeking God personally, not looking at all this other shit, all these people, these, or what Kyle said, false prophets to show you what that
Hey,
means.
Glenn.
You know, like I think that this is the problem with people like Southern Bra is that they're trying to show people what that
I
means.
I
You
think
need to
again,
seek that.
I think it's people putting the cart before the horse. I
Yeah.
do think that the pursuit of a relationship with Jesus Christ, with
Hmm.
God, will eventually, like I said, lead to changes. Like I don't think that we can experience God and come away the same over time. Like I think that will transform us, and that's what I mean by born again. Is like I do believe that in a sense that the reason why we need a savior is that we are like God made us to be somebody, and before we encounter Jesus, we're like a shell of that. Like we are trapped in the ensnarement of sin, sort of like in a broken, sin saturated version of what God created, and God wants to restore that, wants to have relationship with us, and so when we're born again, you will in the same way like when you're married, you in a good marriage, you make compromises and changes over time, not because like your spouse is demanding you to do so, but because like
You think it's
the
the right thing to
it's
do.
you think it like you're convicted, like you know what, like
Because sin
I
is human
want to
nature.
well, I want to do things. It's like I want to do this for my wife because I love her, and that's how it and that is a parallel to our relationship with God is that I do think that, it's like there is a culture downstream of being a Christian that can be created. But I think a lot of what you're seeing on social media is people are just superficially creating what looks like a Christian culture and then
Hmm.
claiming to be Christian. And again, it's like my problem is I don't even know what a Christian culture is because again, that's going to look different depending on where you are in the world.
Hmm.
Like go again, go to Ghana, Africa, where my dad went, and go to one of their church services and be like, "Oh man, you guys aren't doing it right." You know what I mean? You're not, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you're not
They
real
look at you as a
Christians.
heretic.
You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, they don't do church at all like they do it here in the West. Like they don't have these, you know, nice, neat services where it's like, we do a bunch of worship songs and then there's a little sermon and then they do the communion and stuff. It's like, it's almost just like this long, like, celebration. And like people are just singing and dancing and then reading from the Bible, but it's like it's all mixed into each other and it's just very authentic and spontaneous. It's not overly planned or like overly produced and stuff like you see a lot of church services here in the West. Um, then look at like Eastern church services, and they're very, like Eastern Orthodox churches. It's a
Oh
very
yeah.
different experience than a lot of evangelicals are used to because it's a lot more focused on the sacraments and the spiritual mysticism in those. Those are all Christian. Those are all people who profess Christ as their savior and who are seeking a relationship with God. So like, what is Christian culture? You know what I mean? I would
I
say if
think
you're gonna,
a lot of people are actually taking things that are cultural and calling them Christian.
well, that's
Like,
true. So I mean, like for example, um, the idea of gender roles is something that is often pushed as a Christian
no,
concept,
that's not.
and it's
You're a
not.
woman.
There is
Yeah,
no you go throughout the entire Bible and try to find anywhere where there's like a prescription of gender roles.
you are.
Now, I think that there is something like, Carrie Baldwin, who's at LCI with me, has a term which I like, which is like comparative advantage. Like there might be comparative advantage where on average, women might have temperaments or spiritual giftings that lend towards certain things, and so there's like a natural diversity that often can exist in family
Mhm.
units and relationships, but that's not a role is like an authoritarian prescription, and that's
No, it's
different than natural.
Greco-Roman. It's Greco-Roman. Like,
Y-
it's from
Yeah,
the pater familia. It is absolutely a polytheistic idea, the concept of gender roles. So I think it's very funny when Christians try to pretend that that is a Christian idea, because it is not. And I'm not saying that there isn't value, because just because something is Greco-Roman doesn't mean that it's not good. It doesn't mean that everything that they had as a culture idea is bad too, you know? Like, I'm not gonna say that, but I'm gonna say, don't say that it's Christian,
well,
right?
I think a lot of people are reacting to kind of like what's going on with uh, kind of like the gender ideology of the left, and
Oh, of
sort of
course.
like the saying that there's no differences between men and women, and so like
Mhm.
they're reacting against that, and then trying to push
Counter signal.
a counter, like, no, like men and women are different, and they're different in every way, and they have these strict roles that they have to adhere to based on what the Bible says. And I'm like, well, no, like that's not true either. I mean, I mean, I just think these people haven't read their Bibles. I mean, again, when I read the Bible, not just the New Testament, the Old and the New, there are so many female figures that are just complete badasses. I mean,
Mhm.
there's the judge, I think, with a jail, or I forget how you pronounce it, who literally like leads Israel and then like kills a tyrant like herself. There's Esther, obviously. Ruth. I
And in the
mean,
new, there's Priscilla, there's, Junia, I think is what it there's all sorts. Like, but that's and people actually undermine how many women were actually involved in the early church. I actually get really,
oh
like,
yeah,
annoyed by
Jesus
this.
Jesus revealed himself to women first
Mhm.
in the
Yeah.
gospel. Now there's like just discrepancies over if it was, one or several and things like that. But anyway, there's a lot of there's a lot of things in the Bible that are like they subvert your expectations when you go in. Like people will go into the Bible expecting like it's this like patriarchal, like, traditional, like they like, the way it's painted by like conservatives in our culture. And I'm like, no, there is so much in the Bible that subverts the expectations that you
Yes.
go in with it. It's
I
not,
agree with you.
it's not patriarchal, it's not matriarchal. It's like
No,
these are
exactly.
man-made systems that we're trying to box
Force
God
fit.
and box
Yeah.
the Bible into. And I was like, no, like what makes my God worth devoting my entire life to and worshiping and declaring as my listen, I'm a temperamentally, I'm a an anarchist. But right, and temperamentally, I'm probably like more left leaning person in my personality traits. I'm high in openness. I hate borders. I'm high in creativity and stuff like that. Um, so my general predisposition is to rebel against authority. The only reason I submit voluntarily to the supernatural authority uh, that I spend like most of my life talking about is because the reading the Bible and experiencing God transformed me, because it's not to me. I just, when I read the Bible, I come away with going, yeah, I don't see how any man could have conceived of this. Just the way that all the stories interplay with each other, the narrative from the Old Testament to the New Testament, and yeah, and listen, I agree that all uh, these were traditions that were handed down and stories that came into being, and there's a lot of nuance, and when you study the history of how the Bible was made, and I don't dispute any of the um, scholarly work that's been done in explaining that, and to me that just makes it even more impressive that this thing came to be what
Well,
it
I
is, and
won't
there's
do
no.
biblical inerrancy. That's, like, the one thing I won't I don't think that the do you believe in biblical inerrancy?
It depends on how you define it. I think the problem is people. So I think a better term is biblical infallibility. I don't think that the scripture fails. I think that
Our interpretations do.
our interpretations do, and I
Mhm.
don't think that the Bible has errors in terms of like there's anything there that's not supposed to be there. But the problem is a lot of times people
Then
will.
you believe that, like, the canon that was created in, like, the 400 think 5th century. Like that was what created the canon. So it's hard. I would probably disagree with that, but I do want to bring up this one thing. The Bible is very clear about gender roles. I
Cool.
actually
Yeah. Well,
I'll,
you know
I'll
what's
give you
funny?
I will give you $100 if you can
Yeah.
find the term
Jacob.
gender role anywhere in the Bible.
You know what, Jacob? I think you should totally hook up with my buddy Glenn. He is if I recall correctly, a college-educated church pastor. That dude knows what he's talking about. I think you two would have an awesome conversation, and he's very,
Oh.
very pro red pill. I think you should totally hook up with him and have a conversation with
If-
sometime.
if-
I think it would be awesome.
If we want to talk about the history of Christianity and the history of church, I'd love to hook up with them because that's like
I've
one of
said
my
we should totally have him
passionate
on.
things to
Glenn,
talk about.
Glenn
And
is a very, very good dude. And
Well-
I think we should totally have him on.
I also will say that I do. So when I say I don't believe in inerrancy, I believe that like the people that were writing the Bible, I believe that they're divinely inspired, but they're also being written by humans, and
Sure.
that are also being influenced by their culture. So like you have to consider that, and you have to think
Yeah, that's where
about
biblical hermeneutics come into play, and sound interpretation, humility, and understanding how a lot of things are not one-to-one, like direct ratios in terms of, like you always should start by what did this mean to the people who it was written
Yes.
to at the time, and then you figure out what that means, you figure out what principles are at play there, and then you see how they apply to what's going on today. And you also have to understand the writing styles. People in our very Western, culture, we always expect things to be written in a very like chronological or in a very specific way. That's not often how people wrote in antiquity. They would often write things out of chronological order and put things more in like thematic organization rather than chronological. Then the other complicating thing about this is at least Hebrew has, I think, more of a coherent sentence structure. But when you get to the interpreting the New Testament and trying to understand Greek, which the sentence structure might as well just like, what is sentence structure when you're reading ancient Greek? The words just kind of can be put in any order that they want, and then you're trying to come down, well, why did they put this word here rather than here? So there's often the problem with inerrancy is two things. People confuse inerrancy with literalism, which just kind of overlooks the fact that different parts of the Bible are written in literary styles that would lend themselves towards not being taken literally. And that's the problem. People will say, well, it's either all literal or none of it is. And if you say anything else, you're cherry picking. I'm like, well, no, you can use the literary style of what you're reading to make reasonable conclusions about whether or not this was written as, hey, this is a history, or this is more allegorical, or this is more prose or something like that. So yeah, I mean, yeah, we I know we're running short on time here, but yeah, I mean,
know.
the
This is, I
we
mean,
could
this
we could
in
do
my
hours
opinion,
on all these topics.
reason is very important, which, and logos, reason, the concept of using our brains to actually think about these things, and not just from an emotional standpoint. I actually think that we're supposed to fucking think about them using our fucking cerebral cortex, prefrontal cortex. We're supposed to like really think about these things deeply. And yeah, this was a great talk. Give the audience where they can find you, your thing.
Yeah, so at Biblical Anarchy, if you want to follow me on X or Twitter or whatever we call it. You can go to biblicalanarchypodcast.com if you want to check out more about the idea of Christian libertarianism or Christian anarchism, or you can look for the Biblical Anarchy podcast on YouTube or Apple, Spotify, all the different stuff. I'm on pretty much all those different platforms. And definitely also check out the Libertarian Christian Institute. Check out the other we have other podcasts at LCI, and also a bunch of articles and stuff on our website. We have this book right here, which I can't recommend enough, called Faith Seeking Freedom. This is Libertarian Christian Answers to Tough Questions. So it's kind of like it's probably, let's see how many pages. It's like 120 some pages, just answering questions that people have, mainly from the Christian perspective, on libertarianism and how that is complementary to or uh, congruent with what the Bible teaches about government and human authority and things like that. So that's a great resource that I'd plug as well. And yeah, that's all I got. I appreciate you having me on. It was a fun grab bag of different conversations. Happy to do it again sometime on any of them.
Yeah. Kyle.
Yeah, of course. 5 till midnight, Mondays at 8 p.m. with the boys for Biting the Bullet, Adam Nutter and Sam Urban. You can find my personal show in Liberty and Health 2 days a week. And then obviously here, 8:30 every Thursday night. I think we're not going to be on next Thursday, so make sure you just tune into my channel for that, and I'll obviously direct people to subscribe here and all that good stuff. My band is called A Common Crown. You can find me at Comatovic on Twitter.
I will not be live next Thursday because I have a show on Friday, February 16th. If you're in the New England area, come to my show. It's a good time. It's a very, very unique style of show. And I guess so. And to bring it all back, my show has implied nudity and it does not inspire lust. I've asked a lot of people. I was like, are you lustful watching this? And it doesn't happen. So I do think that when it comes to nudity and stuff, sometimes it's
Well, it's like
dependent on the
dude
context.
sculptures and things like that. Again,
It depends on the art. It really does. And also, Glenn, I'm going to be live again in about a half hour. If you want to come and talk about Christianity, I will fucking argue with you right now. Like if you're down, if you're DTA, down to argue, let's go. Or down to
I'm
debate.
I'm messaging him right now.
No, yeah, I'm
I
down to talk to him about it. Also, I do plan on doing a religious segment of the show on a different day on Mondays where I get more into religion because it's something I'm really passionate about and I want to talk about it more. But I want to keep Thursdays more cultural, but I also want to talk about religion in a different way. So, and I want to really get into the nuances of it because I think there's a lot people try to make it more simplistic than I think that it is in a lot of ways and when it comes to interpreting things and stuff. So I'm gonna be doing that soon, but I will be live again in a half hour if you're trying to hang out for hot takes. And GG's, y'all. Bye.